War criminal. That's what Zohran Mamdani called Narendra Modi. Not in private, not in a moment of anger, in public, at a candidates' forum. When asked if he would share a stage with India's prime minister, he didn't just say no. He went further. He labeled the democratically elected leader of 1.4 billion people a war criminal. Let those words sink in. War criminal. The Prime Minister of India. But here's where the story takes a turn. Elections are days away, and suddenly Zohran Mamdani is visiting temples during Diwali. Suddenly he's talking about an India where everyone belongs. Suddenly he's quoting Nehru and speaking of pluralism. Suddenly he promises to represent all New Yorkers equally, even those who admire the very leader he branded a criminal. So here's the question that matters. Is this transformation real? Or is this the oldest trick in politics, saying whatever it takes to win? This is the story of a man who built his career condemning India, who made claims so false they collapse under basic fact-checking, who showed nothing but contempt for the world's largest democracy until he needed Indian-American votes. Watch what happens when a politician's past catches up with him. Watch what happens when insults meet consequences. Watch what happens when a community refuses to be taken for granted. This is about more than one election. This is about memory, about accountability, about whether politicians can slander your homeland and expect your vote when it becomes convenient. Let us begin. Let us start back to a time before Mamdani needed Indian votes, a time when his words flowed freely, unfiltered by electoral mathematics. Picture this moment, a candidates forum in New York City. The lights are bright, the audience is engaged. Someone asks young Mamdani a straightforward question. Would he share a stage with Prime Minister Narendra Modi if the Indian leader visited New York? His answer came swift and sharp, like a blade cutting through the air. He would not. Not only would he refuse to stand beside Modi, but he went further, much further. He placed India's democratically elected prime minister in the same category as Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader facing international scrutiny. Both in Mamdani's eyes were war criminals. Both deserved prosecution. Both should face arrest. Think about what that means for a moment. This was not a private conversation. This was not a slip of the tongue in an unguarded moment. This was a public declaration, a calculated statement delivered with conviction and confidence. But the story grows darker still. Mamdani spoke about Gujarat, the Western Indian state that has become a symbol of economic transformation and development. He made a claim so stunning, so divorced from reality, that it defies basic fact-checking. According to his narrative, Muslims were completely eradicated from Gujarat during the riots of 2002. Wiped out, eliminated, erased from existence. Listen to those words again, eradicated, as if an entire community simply vanished from the face of the earth. The truth? Gujarat's Muslim population stands at approximately 10%. Millions of people. Thriving communities, businesses, schools, mosques, families living their lives. More Muslims call Gujarat home than exist in the entire United States of America. This is not opinion. This is demographic fact, census data, reality. Yet Mamdani stood before audiences and declared these millions of people to be ghosts, erased, non-existent. How does someone make such a claim? What research did he conduct? Which sources did he consult? Or did he simply assume that his listeners in New York would never verify his words, that they would accept his narrative without question because it fit a certain political worldview? The accusations continued to pile up. Kashmir, that beautiful, mountainous region that has been an integral part of India since independence, was described by Mamdani as occupied territory. Apartheid, he called it, a system of racial segregation imposed by a foreign occupier. He spoke of self-determination for Kashmiris as if the Indian constitution did not exist, as if the democratic processes in that region were meaningless, as if the voice of the Indian people counted for nothing. And here is where the hypocrisy becomes almost artistic in its brazenness. Mamdani, the champion of human rights, who speaks so eloquently about oppression and injustice, somehow found no words for Pakistan, the nation where Hindu populations have plummeted from double digits to barely 1% over 7 decades, where temples are demolished, where young girls from minority communities face kidnapping and forced conversion? Where does Mamdani's righteous anger disappear when it comes to these crimes? Or Bangladesh? Once upon a time, Hindus formed nearly 30% of that land. Today, less than 8% and falling. Temples attacked, properties seized, families driven from ancestral homes, silence from Mamdani, complete absolute silence. This is the pattern. This is the method. Speak loudly about India. Condemn its leaders. Question its courts. Undermine its democratic institutions. But when it comes to the systematic erasure of Hindu and minority populations in neighboring Islamic republics, cricket sounds, deafening quiet. But let us examine not just what Mamdani says, but how he lives. He presents himself as a democratic socialist, a champion of equality, someone who believes wealth should be redistributed, that no one should have excessive privilege while others struggle. Beautiful words, inspiring rhetoric, the kind of talk that makes young idealists' hearts swell with hope. And then there is his actual life. Mamdani does not live in modest circumstances. He does not redistribute his family's wealth to the communities he claims to represent. He does not sacrifice comfort for principle. Instead, he maintains a lifestyle that places him comfortably above those he speaks for. He enjoys privileges that would be impossible for the working-class voters he courts. This is not a minor contradiction. This strikes at the very heart of credibility. If someone truly believes in socialist principles, should they not demonstrate those beliefs through their choices? Should they not lead by example? Imagine a doctor who smokes 3 packs a day, telling patients that cigarettes will kill them. Imagine a fitness instructor who never exercises lecturing others about health. The words might be technically correct, but the messenger has destroyed the message through their own actions. This is Mamdani's dilemma. His lifestyle and his family background stand in stark contrast to everything he publicly advocates. It suggests one of 2 possibilities. Either he is deliberately dishonest with his voters, telling them what they want to hear while living by different rules, or he genuinely believes these things but lacks the courage or commitment to practice them himself. Neither option inspires confidence. Neither option suggests a leader of integrity. Now observe what happened when Mamdani won his Democratic primary. Suddenly, a certain section of commentators erupted in celebration. The same voices that have spent years questioning India's electoral mandates. The same analysts who describe every victory by Prime Minister Modi as fascism, as hatred, as the death of democracy. When Modi wins with massive margins, carrying state after state, securing hundreds of millions of votes, these voices call it dangerous. They warn of authoritarianism. They speak of fear and division. They question whether democracy can survive such outcomes. But when Mamdani defeats his opponent in a local race, suddenly it is beautiful. It is love winning over hate. It is hope triumphing over darkness. It is democracy functioning exactly as it should. Can anyone explain this logic? How does one electoral victory represent love while another represents hate? What is the principle being applied here? The answer, of course, is that there is no principle. There is only politics. There is only the desperate search for any stick to beat India with. One commentator from India's opposition Congress Party went so far as to congratulate Gujarat for finally having a proper global political ambassador through Mamdani. Read that sentence again slowly. A man who claims Muslims were eradicated from Gujarat is being celebrated as Gujarat's true representative. A man who calls India's democratically elected prime minister a war criminal is being praised for bringing honor to an Indian state. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. These same voices speak of love. They use the Urdu word mohabbat. They claim Mamdani's campaign was rooted in empathy, in bringing people together, in celebrating diversity. But listen to what this man of mohabbat actually said. He described the construction of the Ram Mandir, a temple at a site sacred to millions of Hindus, as an atrocity. Not just wrong, not just disagreeable, an atrocity. He attended rallies where the most vile abuse was hurled at Hindu communities, and he stood silently, watching, allowing it, enabling it. Is this mohabbat? Is this love? Or is this exactly the kind of divisive rhetoric that these same commentators claim to oppose? The double standard is not subtle, it is not hidden, it is displayed openly, proudly, without shame. When Modi speaks of cultural pride, it is called nationalism and equated with fascism. When Mamdani quotes Jawaharlal Nehru's tryst with destiny speech, suddenly he is a torchbearer of pluralism. When Modi implements policies in Kashmir that have led to reduced violence and increased development, it is occupation and oppression. When Mamdani calls for self-determination in that same region, undermining India's constitutional integrity, it is principle and courage. When Ram Mandir is constructed after decades of legal process, culminating in a Supreme Court verdict, it is hatred. When Mamdani condemns that verdict and participates in anti-Hindu gatherings, it is justice. The pattern is consistent. The methodology is clear. Anything that strengthens India's self-confidence is bad. Anything that weakens it is good. Any leader who refuses to bow to Western narratives is dangerous. Any critic who amplifies those narratives is enlightened. And then something changed. The calendar moved forward. The election date approached. And Mamdani's campaign managers likely showed him some numbers. Inconvenient numbers. Numbers about how many Indian Americans live in New York City. Numbers about how they vote. Numbers about what happens when you alienate the fastest growing, highest educated, most economically successful immigrant community in American history. Suddenly, Mamdani discovered temples. During Diwali, the festival of lights celebrated by Hindus, Sikhs, and Jains, he appeared at multiple places of worship, hands folded, smile bright. Speaking of unity and inclusion, he addressed Hindu American gatherings. His message? That he grew up with a vision of India where everyone belonged, where pluralism was celebrated, where differences were embraced. Notice the language carefully. He did not apologize for calling Modi a war criminal. He did not retract his claim about Muslims being eradicated from Gujarat. He did not acknowledge that perhaps, just perhaps, he had been wrong about some things. Instead, he justified himself. He explained that his criticism comes from love, from his memories of an India that welcomed all faiths, an India of harmony and coexistence. And his opposition to Modi, he claimed, stems from the Prime Minister's alleged abandonment of those values. This is sophisticated political rhetoric. It allows him to maintain his previous positions while softening their edges. It lets him appear thoughtful and principled rather than opportunistic. But here's the question that cuts through the rhetoric. Why now? Why this message at this moment? Why the sudden outreach to a community he had previously condemned and insulted? The answer is embarrassingly obvious. Because he needs their votes. Because the election is close. Because his lead in polls has begun to shrink. Because his opponent, though trailing, might close the gap if enough Indian Americans decide they have had enough of being lectured and slandered. He even made sure to say he would represent everyone equally, that people who disagree with him about Modi deserve his service just as much as those who agree, that all 8.5 million New Yorkers, regardless of their views on India's Prime Minister, would receive equal treatment. How magnanimous, how generous of him to agree to represent people despite their admiration for a leader he called a war criminal. This is not bridge building, this is damage control. And then the election ended. Zohran Mamdani did not just win votes, he won office. On January 1st, 2026, Zohran Mamdani was sworn in as the mayor of New York City. This matters, because now this is no longer about campaign speeches or symbolic gestures. This is about power, about decisions, about governance. In his first days in office, Mamdani moved quickly. He announced housing and rent measures. He spoke about childcare, homelessness, and redistribution. Supporters praised his urgency. Critics warned of economic risk. But one thing became clear very fast. Once the votes were counted, India disappeared from his speeches. There were no apologies, no clarifications, no corrections. The words war criminal were never withdrawn. Gujarat was never mentioned again. Kashmir vanished from his public language. The temples were no longer needed. The question was no longer how to win Indian American trust. The question now was how to govern New York City. And this silence told its own story. Let us zoom out and see the full picture of who Zohran Mamdani reveals himself to be. He claims to fight for justice, but only certain kinds of justice. Hindu populations disappearing from Pakistan and Bangladesh? Not his concern. Muslim populations thriving and growing in India? Evidence of genocide, apparently. He presents himself as anti-establishment, fighting against entrenched power. But he receives support from the very establishment he claims to oppose. The same political machinery, the same donor networks, the same media ecosystem that protects certain narratives while attacking others. He speaks of peace and coexistence, then attends rallies where hatred flows freely, as long as it is directed at the right targets. He advocates for international law and human rights, but shows no interest when those principles apply to uncomfortable situations. When Hindu minorities face persecution, where is his voice? When Sikh and Christian communities in Pakistan struggle under blasphemy laws that are used as weapons, where are his press conferences? He condemns Modi for events in 2002, despite years of judicial inquiry that found no criminal culpability. India's courts, after exhaustive investigation, reached conclusions that Mamdani simply dismisses. He knows better than judges who examined evidence for years. He knows better than legal processes in the world's largest democracy. This is not just arrogance. This is a fundamental disrespect for India's institutions. The same disrespect shown by certain political parties within India who question every verdict that does not favor them, who undermine every institution that does not bend to their will. Mamdani has even stated he would arrest Modi if given the chance. Not just refuse to meet him, not just protest his policies, actually arrest him, prosecute him, treat the elected leader of 1.4 billion people as a common criminal. Think about what that reveals about his worldview. He believes he has the moral authority to override the democratic choice of hundreds of millions of voters. He believes his judgment supersedes India's entire constitutional framework. He believes that India's Supreme Court, its investigative agencies, its electoral processes, all of it means nothing compared to his personal convictions. This is not the thinking of a humble public servant. This is the mindset of someone who believes he alone possesses truth and righteousness. But Mamdani is not just one individual politician in one American city. He represents something larger, something more troubling. He is part of a network, a movement, an ecosystem of voices that have taken root in Western institutions, in universities, in media organizations, in political parties, in nonprofit groups. Voices that share a common thread, hostility toward India's current trajectory. They do not object to India being poor. They never did. When India struggled, when its people lived in deprivation, when its economy stagnated, these voices were quiet. Some were even sympathetic. But now that India is rising, now that it is building infrastructure, launching satellites, manufacturing advanced technology, asserting itself on the world stage, now there is a problem. Now there is concern. Now there is endless criticism. They do not mind India being democratic, as long as Indians elect leaders who defer to Western approval. They celebrate Indian culture, as long as Indians perform it for their entertainment rather than living it with pride. They support Indian progress as long as it happens at a pace and in a manner that does not threaten established hierarchies. Mamdani fits perfectly into this ecosystem. He provides a brown face to criticisms that would sound different coming from others. He offers the cover of authenticity. After all, he is of Indian origin. He can claim to speak from personal experience, from cultural understanding. Never mind that he has built his political career in America, not India. Never mind that he engages with Indian issues from thousands of miles away through the lens of Western progressive politics rather than Indian realities. Never mind that his knowledge of India appears frozen in time, shaped more by ideology than observation. He is useful, and in politics, usefulness matters more than truth. Now, Indian Americans in New York are no longer choosing a candidate. They are judging a mayor. The election is over. The promises have been made. The outreach has served its purpose. What remains is memory. Do communities remember what was said when their votes were not needed? Or do they accept silence as change? Some Indian Americans may feel that Mamdani's positions on New York City matters outweigh his statements about Indian politics. They may believe he would be an effective mayor regardless of his views on Modi. They may separate the local from the international. Others may feel betrayed. They may see his transformation as the worst kind of political opportunism. They may question whether someone who showed such disrespect for their heritage deserves their trust. They may wonder what he will say about India once the votes are counted, and he no longer needs to be careful. Both positions are understandable. Both reflect legitimate concerns. But here is what cannot be denied. Mamdani's shift in tone is not coincidental. It is not organic. It is not the result of genuine evolution in his thinking. It is calculated. It is strategic. It is driven by electoral mathematics. If Indian American votes did not matter, would he be visiting temples? Would he be quoting Nehru? Would he be speaking of pluralism and inclusion? Would he be carefully acknowledging that people have different views about Modi? The answer is obvious to anyone being honest. There is something almost beautiful in this cynical dance, because for all its manipulation and opportunism, it actually proves something important about democracy. It proves that communities have power, that votes matter, that politicians, no matter how convinced of their righteousness, must eventually answer to voters. Mamdani can believe whatever he wants about Modi. He can maintain his criticisms privately. He can discuss Gujarat with his advisors and allies. But publicly, when facing voters who care deeply about these issues, he must moderate. He must explain. He must reach out. This is democracy working, even if the mechanics are uncomfortable to watch. Indian Americans in New York have sent a message, whether Mamdani wanted to receive it or not. They have shown that their votes cannot be taken for granted, that calling their prime minister a war criminal has consequences, that making false claims about their home state will be noticed and remembered. They have exercised the power that comes from being engaged citizens in a democracy. They have demonstrated that identity politics is not a one-way street, that if other communities can organize around their interests, so can they. This is not about blind loyalty to any leader. This is about respect, about basic dignity, about not tolerating slander and lies dressed up as progressive politics. Strip away all the complexity, remove all the political theater. Look past the temple visits and the Nehru quotes and the carefully crafted statements about inclusion. What are we left with? A man who needs something from a community he previously insulted, a politician who said whatever came to mind when Indian votes seemed unimportant, and now says whatever is necessary because those same votes have become critical. This raises the fundamental question that applies to all political leaders everywhere. When do we see the real person? When they need nothing from us? Or when they need everything? Mamdani without political pressure called Modi a war criminal. Mamdani with political pressure speaks of respecting different viewpoints. Which version is authentic? Which one reveals his true beliefs? Or perhaps both are authentic in their own way. Perhaps he truly does view Modi negatively, but also truly does recognize the political necessity of moderating that view. Perhaps conviction and calculation coexist in his mind, wrestling for dominance. If so, which one will win after the election? Which Mamdani will govern? The one who condemns India's leadership, or the one who promises equal representation to all? Nobody knows, not even perhaps Mamdani himself. One local race showed what's possible. Now it's up to diaspora communities worldwide to decide whether this moment becomes a movement or fades into memory.